Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ready, Set, Go for PSO. What veteran data collectors need to know for 2024 data collection. I'm Charlotte Alverson at the University of Oregon with the ODE PSO project, and this presentation is in collaboration with Shava Feinstein from ODE. So to give you an overview of what we're going to do today, I'm going to talk about purpose and assumptions. I'm going to review the results just very briefly from the 2023 data collection that's on students who left school during the 2021-22 school year. And then because you're veteran data collectors, I'll give you just a few reminders and some heads up on recording contacts, some tricks, and again, some reminders with that, and close with some resources. So the purpose is to give you a broad overview of PSO processes, timelines, and resources for 2024. Some assumptions that I'm making as veteran data collectors. I'm assuming that you're familiar with the general PSO data collection purpose and process, that you've collected and reported PSO data for multiple years, and that you know how to access the PSO app in Central Login. If these are not, excuse me, the accurate assumptions, and you haven't collected data for a very long time, you're not familiar with the purpose and the process, or you need help logging in, then I encourage you to reach out to us at pso@uoregon.edu with questions, or attend one of the other trainings, and I'll talk about that here in a few minutes. So to give you just a very high-level overview of the results from school year 21-22, remember that with PSO, students have to have been out of school for at least 1 year, and it takes a little while. It takes about 3 to 4 months to be able to get the data cleaned and officially reported. So it feels like it's much longer and that these are old data, but in fact, 21-22 is the most current school year data that we have available. So out of the 5,435 former students who were eligible for this data collection, we had a response rate of 52.7%. So just a little over 2,800 students participated, or their designee. Out of those 2,866, 2,135 were engaged, either in higher education, competitive employment, other post-secondary education or training, or some other employment. So that gives us right at a 75% response rate, leaving 25%, 26% not engaged. And you see that breakdown specifically by each of the engagement categories in the pie chart on the right-hand side of this slide. I want to pause for a minute and just say sincerely thank you for the work that you're doing to help collect those data, to prepare students to answer the data questions, to engage with parents or former students' designee. Without your help, this work couldn't be accomplished. And so sincerely thank you for the work that you do to make this possible. Some process reminders. So remember that in order to get started with this, we're asking you to identify your PSO team. And that team consists of an administrator, one or more points of contact for the exit or the follow-up interviews, and then any staff who are collecting data in the app. You have to enter this information in order to move forward in the app. The reason we ask for this information is so that if something goes wrong with the system, or if we see a problem in how data are being collected, we can reach out to that one person. Or maybe there's an error in one case that the responses weren't recorded and we need to reach out to a person. That's the reason that we ask for this information, so that we know who to contact in case something happens. The student list for review will be open in the next few days. By the end of this week is what we're hoping for. You use the student list to look at students that ODE and you have identified as eligible or potentially eligible for this data collection. And look through that list to see, are there names that you expect to be on there you're not seeing? Are there names on that list that you don't know where they came from? It really is intended to let you preview your list and make sure that the students who are eligible for this data collection are indeed eligible. If you need to make additions or deletions to the student list for PSO data collection, you send only the SSID number to ODE's data team, and they will verify that that student should or should not be on the list. You see here on the email, or see here on the screen, the email address for the ODE data team. University of Oregon cannot manage your list. We don't update it. We don't change it. All we do is have it imported from ODE based on the data that school districts report to ODE. So reach out to the ODE data team if additions or deletions are needed to your student review list. We highly encourage you to use the online PSO data app to record your attempts and your interview data. We do this for a number of reasons. First of all, it eliminates duplication of your work effort. So one person does the data collection, another person who enters it, you're doing the work twice. It also reduces the likelihood of error in data entry. And thirdly, it ensures that the right questions are asked because the system has skip logic built into it, so that based on the former student or their designee's response, the right next question shows. It also has built into the system prompts. It has directions built into it. If you're working from a paper copy, it actually requires a much higher level of skill and knowledge and understanding and accuracy in order to get the right information. So we encourage you to use the online app for all data collection. Remember too that the interview is meant to be a conversation. So rather than reading the question verbatim and reading the list of responses, we expect the interviewer to be familiar enough with the interview to be able to read the question and ask the question then in a conversational way. So as a data collector, you're reading the question to yourself and then forming it to that former student or designee so that it becomes an engaging conversation. As they're answering those questions, you're reading the list of answer categories again to yourself and choosing the right answer that's based on that conversation with the former student or their designee. Sometimes it's necessary to reword a question or to probe, that is, ask additional questions in order for the former student or their designee to understand the question. So you might have to modify it if you're talking to a person who is a non-English speaker, non-native English speaker. You might need to reword your question depending on the service categories that the former student was receiving special education services under. You might need to reword it to make it a little simpler for them to understand. And that's perfectly fine. Again, we want it to be a conversation between you and the former student and their designee. One of the things that we know from survey research is that pre-notification really increases the likelihood of getting a response, getting a student, a former student or their designee to say yes to taking time to have this conversation. So what you can do right now is tell your current seniors, super seniors, that you're going to reach out to them in the next year or a year from now, what the purpose and the timeline of that follow-up interview is, how those data get used. Use the postcard, the Oregon for PSO postcard, as a reminder. Have the students to fill it out, and then a year from now, when it's time for you to have that conversation with them, send them the postcard 2-3 weeks in advance of making that contact with them. Make sure that families and former students know they're going to be contacted. Again, that's the purpose of the PSO card. If you have a social media platform that you're using at your school, post it on the social media, send them a letter. The letter can be, mass produced, but then put it in a hand addressed envelope to say, hey, Charlotte, we're going to be reaching out to you in the next year and or the next few weeks, and we want to really talk to you and hear what's going on. Remember that when you're making contacts, the point is to make multiple attempts on multiple days at multiple times. Think about this. If your former students are enrolled in post-secondary education or training, or they're employed, they may not be available to talk to you during the hours of a typical school day. And so your results are actually being biased lower because you're not able to reach those students to say, hey, yes, we were successful. We were enrolled, we were engaged. So attempts to make phone calls on the weekends or in the evenings needs to be something that's available for interviewers to do in order to increase that likelihood of having a positive result. Remember too that this information is confidential. Some of the questions are rather sensitive and you don't want to embarrass anyone. You also don't want that information shared beyond the person who is doing the interview. So keep all the information confidential. Okay, so we get into the pre-interview, and this is one of the first questions, or is the first question that you're asked in the pre-interview. Is the student eligible to take the follow-up interview? This is a question for you to answer as the interviewer. It shows the reasons here that they're not eligible. If you have reviewed your student list prior to starting the interviews and you've made any additions and deletions, then you can go ahead and collect yes here and move on. If you didn't review that student list prior to starting the interviews, you're going to want to confirm that the student is still eligible. You can do this by checking your school data. You can also ask the student at the time that you're doing the interview, hey, have you been back to school? Did you re-enroll in the former school since last year? If no is selected, you'll be prompt to give the reason for why the student is ineligible. And again, this helps us to make sure that the data are accurate and thorough when we're cleaning the data. So the pre-interview question about eligibility is something that you as the interviewer can determine. Unlike the consent pre-interview question, this question says, are you willing to answer a few questions about your education, jobs, and life in general following high school? This question is being asked to, presumably, the former student or their designee. So this is one of those cases where if you're talking to a student's designee, his mother, father, you're going to want to rephrase it. Are you willing to answer a few questions about your child's jobs, education, and life in general since leaving high school? In order to answer this question, you have to talk to someone. You, as the interviewer, cannot give consent. The parent consents to answer the question or not. The parent cannot give the consent for the former student. So the idea here is you're talking to either the former student or their designee at the time that this question is being answered. It's this question that is used to determine consent or refusal numbers. Not having contact information, not getting an answer after leaving a message is not a refusal because you have not talked to a person. So if you reach out, attempt to make a phone or have a conversation with a former student, you don't reach them, you leave a message, you can't answer this question. So let's talk about that attempt. This schematic shows an overview of you sit down and you make an attempt, and it's the decisions that have to be made in order to record contacts. So let's go through this. On the first decision you have to make is, did you talk to a person or did you not talk to a person? So we're going to go through the ideal here. The ideal is we reach a person, right? We've given pre-notification. They know what questions are being asked, why they're being asked, and how the information is going to be used. So we get a person on the phone, we explain the purpose of the call, and the person says, yes, I'll talk to you, I'll answer your questions. So they've consented, they've agreed. At this point, we say yes on that consent question that I just showed you. You continue with the interview, you complete the post interview, and you select submit in the final screen. That's lovely. This is what we want to see, right? Unfortunately, sometimes we talk to a person, we explain who we are, why we're calling, how we're going to use the information. That's explaining the purpose. And the person says, no, thank you, I'm not interested. So they have now refused. That refusal is a contact. It counts in your response rate. At this point, you're going to say, thank you very much for your time. In the interview, you're going to say no to that consent question. You're going to then be taken to the post interview, include your notes there, and then select submit. So this is the ideal. Actually talking to the person, explaining the purpose, getting them to agree, and submitting a completed interview. That's our ideal. But sometimes it isn't possible to talk to a person. So you have to decide, are you going to try again or will you not try again? Let's remember multiple days, multiple attempts. So we're going to try again. At that point, you're going to enter a note or make a comment in the post interview. Remember, you cannot answer that consent question. So you're going to have to skip down to the post interview, select will complete later, and you're going to try another day, another time, or another contact method. And this, you can stay in this loop multiple times. Remember, Oregon wants multiple days, multiple attempts. It isn't unusual for survey data collectors, especially in agencies that are using a professional survey company, to try 30, 35 times to reach someone. Here in Oregon, I typically see as many as 8 to 10 attempts being made. So more than once, over multiple days, multiple times. Try again, try again. But at some point, you're going to have to say, you know what, I'm not going to try again. Maybe that's because it's the end of the season. Maybe that's because you're leaving your position, you're taking a new position. Whatever the reason might be, you're not going to try again. At that point, you're going to complete the post interview, select will not complete, select the reason for not completing, and explain anything unusual in the interviewer notes. You will not select submit. Submit means that that interview is completed. You've talked to someone, you've completed the interview. So your choices when you haven't talked to someone and you're not going to try again is will not complete. So let's talk about the will not complete, will complete later, and the submit buttons. With will not complete, you're saying that that interview will never be done for that student because you have a wrong contact or no contact information. You left a message, you received no response, or the phone just rang and you never got an answer. Will complete later means that it's still in process. You're going to try. Maybe you're trying in June when the system first opens, and you're going to try again in September when you return to school. So here with the will complete later means you're going to continue to try and reach this student. You're going to give the reason for why you're going to continue. So maybe you talk to the person, but there's a baby crying in the background. It's not a good time. Or you reached them while they're at work. Again, they're busy. They can't take time to answer phone right now or talk to you right now. Leave a brief message here. These additional notes are visible to other data collectors. So maybe there are 2 or 3, 4, 5 of you collecting data, and you're working at various times throughout the summer. So Charlotte's going to try to reach Colette. Colette's not available. Charlotte leaves a message. Cindy comes along then. She sees that Colette hasn't been reached. She sees Charlotte's note that she got a new number. Here's the new number. And now Cindy's going to reach out to Colette. So the notes that are put in the additional notes section here show up to other data collectors. Submit, that means that the survey is complete. All the answers have been given. This is what we hope to see. It's that green button. If you get a warning that says not all questions answered, you must answer all required questions. It will start in the order of the questions. If that consent question isn't marked yes or no, it's not going to let you submit that survey. Remember, you have to talk to a person here. If you did not talk to a person, you did not get consent, in which case, instead of clicking the submit button, you want to select the will not complete and give the reason for that. Okay, so submit only for those interviews where you've talked to a person and you've answered all the questions. If you did not talk to a person, you did not get consent, and you're not going to try again, you're going to click will not submit. Here's what it looks like on the contact history. So this is a screenshot from the contact history in the system. It shows every attempt that's made. So you see that on April 5th, 2024 at 11:22 a.m., an attempt was made to reach this former student. The contact information was wrong, but the data collector got a new phone number from mom. So on April 5th, 11:49 a.m., a message was left text message to call me. So you see at the top here, it says will complete later. The interview is still in process. You leave a note in that pop-up box and it shows up here. So this is that example of Charlotte started the phone call or started the interview, made an attempt, didn't reach the person. Cindy's going to now come in and try a few weeks later. So Cindy will be able to see the notes left here. On April the 5th, 11:51, left a message, no response. At April the 5th, 12:12 p.m., I got no answer. And at that point, I said, will not complete. So you see that there are no notes that show up here. It's because these notes show up under will complete later. If you collect will not complete, any note that you have there will be added to the interviewer notes, and interviewer notes are not visible to other interviewers. This is what we don't want to see by way of contact attempts, right? So within 40 minutes, 50 minutes here, the data collector tried 4 times. So yes, that's multiple attempts, but not on multiple days. And so when we look at contact history, we want to see April 5th, maybe we want to try again in July, then again in September. And actually, this is bad for another reason, this contact date, because we shouldn't be starting interviews until students have been out of school for 365 days. And so unless this was a student who dropped out of school, we shouldn't be trying to reach them yet. Okay, post-contact. You've completed the interview. What you want to do is scroll back through those questions, make sure that all the questions have a response, read back through those, reflect on them, make any post-interview questions, complete the post-interview questions. Your interviewer notes, the comments that you leave there are really very helpful for us to understand what's happening with the data collection, why or why not interviews were completed. You'll also see at the time that you submit that record, you'll have your preliminary response data and response rate and engagement rate showing on the PSO dashboard within the system. Remember, those are preliminary until the data get cleaned and finally posted. Those final data will be available in the SPR and I system. And those data, as I understand the SPRI system, are meant to be accessible not just to administrators, but to the people who are actually going to use the data to improve programs. And so that's the final piece here after contact. Once the final results come out, share those data with all the data collectors, talk about what went really well with this year's data collection, talk about how to improve it, and then lastly, make sure that you're looking at those data to start to improve your programs. Asking questions about why X number of students were not engaged, what's happening with those students, what changes do we need to make in order to improve our outcomes. All right, for your 2024 timeline, again, the student list review will be available in the next week or so. Starting June 6th, the PSO app opens for data collection. That'll be available until September 30th. We'll close it at midnight on September 30th. It is not available to be opened after September 30th. Throughout this data collection period, your preliminary results are available within the app, so you can see what your response rate is. You can see which students have and have not been contacted. And then the final PSO results will be available in winter of 2025. Just to give you some save the date 2024 PSO trainings. For administrators, there's an ODE spring training coming up May 2nd. That's by invitation only, and that will come from the ODE team. The 16th and 23rd of May, I'm doing a two-part sequence that's really intended for new administrators and new data collectors who've never done it before. You'll see the time is quite substantive. Registration will be required, and we'll get notifications out for that in the next week. You'll be able to find those on the transitionoregon.org website. So that first part will be a recorded session. It'll be about 30 minutes long. Why does this matter? Why are we doing it? And then the second part will be May 23rd from 3 to 4:30 Pacific time. That will be live. And it really is a walkthrough of how to collect the data for brand new data collectors. Then we had pretty good success last summer with the open mic question and answer. So we'll do two of those again this year. One will be May 30th, right before the app opens for data collection. That'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions, get clarifications on procedures, processes, so forth. And then August 29th, when you're in data collection or you're starting it in September, again, the assumption being you've had a chance to look at the materials, you've had a chance to review any trainings, and you've got questions that you want answered. These two sessions will be totally driven by you and not a pre-recorded or presentation from us in any way. All right, some resources I want to remind you about. First and foremost, there are lots of rich resources on the transitionoregon.org website. I want to call your attention to three specifically related to PSO follow-up. One is the telephone survey script to help you get that consent, to make sure that the student is, or former student and designee are informed about what it is that you're asking them to do. So that's intended to get the consent to be positive. There's also the PSO timeline, which shows you what needs to happen with PSO by when, and it also has the resources that help support that activity. And then contacting the hard to find youth strategies for the post-school survey, that actually comes from the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. And those are strategies for contacting students, former students, their designee, before they're in school, while they're in school, and after school. And it's designed to improve your response rate. If you need technical assistance with the app or with the data collection mechanics, reach out again to pso@uoregon.edu. You can also contact Cindy Post, who is our TA provider for PSO, or myself, Charlotte Alverson, and there are our emails. Sorry about that, forgot one more. Data collection purposes in Oregon, if you need to know what that is, why are we doing this, reach out to Shava at ODE. All right, and with that, I welcome your questions, your suggestions, your feedback. You can scan this code and complete the survey, or you can also email questions or suggestions to pso@uoregon.edu. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your efforts for these data collections that we do. And most importantly, thank you for all that you do on behalf of students who experience a disability in Oregon.